Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to the LionHeart Talks podcast. This 6-part series is all about wellbeing, and on this episode we'll be focusing on social anxiety. I'm Jo Grant. Today we have LionHeart counsellor and CBT therapist Berni Antoniou joining us. Berni, would you like to tell us a little bit about your experience as a counsellor and how long you've been at LionHeart?
Hi Jo, thanks for having me here and having the opportunity to talk about social anxiety. I've been with LionHeart nearly 11 years now. My original training was as a counsellor, a person-centred counsellor, and then I went on to work towards my accreditation. So accreditation is like becoming chartered. That's the easiest way to explain it. So we have certain criteria that we have to meet in order to receive that accreditation. And then a number of years later, I went on to do a postgraduate in cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. And then I combined those different ways of working with the clients that I work with. Prior to being with LionHeart, I spent some time working at the Terence Higgins Trust, which was working with clients that were living with HIV. And I also have worked for a couple of charities as a volunteer as well.
Thanks, Berni. So we've said today you're here to join me to talk about social anxiety. Is this something you come across a lot in your role?
Yes, I'm not sure of the most recent statistics. It was sort of 1 in 8 people that struggle with social anxiety. So many years ago, somebody may have said, it's shyness or extreme shyness, but actually it's one of the most common anxiety disorders.
That's really interesting, because I think there's possibly elements of social anxiety that people perhaps feel in certain situations. I know that's not the full extent, and by no means trying to be dismissive of somebody that really is affected by social anxiety, but I'm sure there's sort of relatable elements to this anxiety disorder.
Yes, yeah.
So I think the best place to start with today's podcast is to look at what the term social anxiety actually means. So maybe you could perhaps start with a little bit of a definition for us, Berni.
Yeah, absolutely. So social anxiety is a fear of social situations, a fear of being judged negatively by others. So this could be meeting new people, going to parties, gatherings, public speaking, going into a busy area. So this could be going shopping or to a supermarket. So really, the bottom line is that fear of being judged negatively by others, how others perceive them.
What might that look like or feel like to somebody that is struggling with social anxiety?
To others, they may perceive the person to be shy or reserved, which, lots of people are. We're all very different. But for the anxious person, so for the person that's really struggling with social anxiety, they may avoid eye contact, they may use their mobile phone as a way of not wanting to be noticed, or they might hold something in their hand to steady themselves. They may avoid invitations and gatherings. They may think that others can see them blushing or trembling or sweating, whereas actually they may not be, but the focus is so inward for that person that their focus of attention is just on them and how they feel that they're coming across to others. So it can be really debilitating.
Yeah, as you say, that sounds like it could be a debilitating condition for somebody and affects so many different areas of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. They tend to mask their anxiety by using what we call safety behaviours or coping mechanisms, like the things I've just mentioned about, avoiding eye contact. For example, in the workplace, they may avoid sort of interacting with their colleagues. They may go to lunch by themselves. In an educational setting, they may sort of stay on their own and not interact with others. The anxiety can feel so overwhelming that anxiety stops them from being able to take in information in that educational setting, if that makes sense. So it has an impact on their learning and and their education. It affects so many parts of their life, and they don't tend to have many friendship groups, or it could be just one friend or two friends. because they're losing out really on that social interaction.
And when would social anxiety usually start? Is it something that can be spotted or noticed in children, or is it more likely to be developed as a teenager or as a young adult as someone gets older?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a number of factors really. So people with social anxiety might have relatives who are anxious or shy. There could be, just have a general shy disposition themselves as a child. Things like critical parenting can have an impact on a child being socially anxious as well. The main onset can be as really as a teenager, they can grow out of it, but it depends on those precipitating factors that continue on in life. So, if somebody's socially anxious, they're more prone to being bullied, which then compounds the problem. Or if they've been humiliated in public, this just adds to it. And, if it's not treated early on, it can go on for years. And people that struggle with social anxiety don't tend to ask for help until later on in life, because the social anxiety really stops them from going to see the GP or going into the doctor's surgery or having to have that one-to-one conversation with the GP. So, it can go on for a long time before it gets picked up. Yeah.
I guess if it takes people a while to go and see their GP about it, then in the process they're developing their own coping mechanisms or their ways of dealing with situations, maybe avoiding situations.
Absolutely, and these are what we call the maintaining factors. This is what keeps the problem going, what we call the maintenance cycle. A person with social anxiety will start to have what we call coping strategies or safety behaviours that help them manage day-to-day life. So, some of the things that we've mentioned already, not accepting invitations, and then that can lead to low mood because, especially, as a younger person, they feel that they're losing out on their, what should be the best years of their life because they're so anxious. They feel that they can't go to social gatherings, or if they do go to social gatherings, it would be quite common that they may maybe try and have a few drinks to help settle their anxiety, which can lead to, them drinking too much to try and cope, which is another problem in itself. So there's, these safety behaviours, coping mechanisms, help them manage these situations, but actually it just keeps the problem going, it maintains the problem. So what we try and do, we'll come on to that after, but what we try and do is to help the person start to reduce these coping mechanisms so that they start to experience themselves that they don't need to have these safety behaviours in place to be able to cope in life, but we'll come on to this after.
Yeah, we can look at that in a little bit more detail, I think, as we get through the podcast, can't we? Mental health just generally is such a complex subject, isn't it? And it's something that it's still taking time to understand.
Lots of people don't know that there are different types of anxiety, or what they call anxiety disorders, but there's lots of things. There's general anxiety, there's social anxiety, there's OCD, there's post-traumatic stress, and lots of people don't realise there are lots of different areas of anxiety, and social anxiety is one of the most common ones.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit there about how this might affect somebody in their day-to-day life, how it might affect friendships, how it might affect socialising, and really have quite an impact on somebody as they grow up. But what about in their working life, or does it, and how might it have an effect on their career as well, I guess?
It's a good question. In the workplace, somebody that struggles with social anxiety would be, maybe less likely to ask for help, if they were working on a project. They just try and sort of muddle along themselves for fear that they might be judged negatively, or fear that, maybe their manager thinks that they can't do the job properly. They may not interact as much with the colleagues within meetings. They may be less likely to speak up, or would maybe, avoid eye contact so nobody asks them a question. They may not put themselves forward for, promotion, and they may be quite likely to stay in the same job for many, many, many years for fear of going to an interview and that performance anxiety that comes with going into an interview. So, they could stay in the same job. They may not progress as well as somebody else would in their careers. And that then, forms another cycle of, feel that they're losing out in life, and that can cause low mood.
That's really interesting. I really hadn't thought about all of the ways that someone could be affected by this. I guess the perhaps struggling to speak up in meetings I might have thought about, but the way it might affect someone's career development, stop them putting themselves forward for promotion and or looking for a different job because of the fear of interviews, really something I hadn't considered.
Yeah, it's something that we take for granted, isn't it? That, we're working in a job, we might want to climb the ladder, we might want to go somewhere else. And for somebody else, yes, you are going to have a certain amount of anxiety at an interview, but somebody with social anxiety wouldn't, just the thought of just applying for a job, it's just easier to stay where they are with what they know, and then they lose out on those, those opportunities.
You've talked a little bit there about how someone's work life might be impacted. I guess what people listening now might be interested to know is how you approach treating somebody that's come to you and is affected by social anxiety.
Well, the first thing we want to try and understand is what are the maintaining factors. So what's keeping the problem going? And, what keeps the problem going is what we call those safety behaviours, or those coping mechanisms. So avoidance, lack of eye contact, withdrawing from social situations, not interacting, they're the maintaining factors. Okay. We start to look at, what's keeping the problem going, and then we start to learn to challenge those. So first of all, we look at the client and what their negative thoughts are about the situation, and start to help them to learn to identify these negative patterns of thinking and start to challenge them. So what we call cognitive restructuring. So we get them to understand what negative thoughts they're having about the situation, and how can they start to think about this differently. We'd also look at things like relaxation techniques. This could be mindfulness, or it could be certain breathing techniques to help keep them calmer in certain situations. But one of the really great things that tends to help is getting the client to challenge themselves in these social situations. So, for example, if somebody has a fear of speaking up in meetings, or a fear of avoiding, of making eye contact, we might say, okay, so maybe next time you go to the meeting, let's set up an experiment, so that maybe 2 or 3 times in that meeting, you might make eye contact with your colleagues, let's say 2 or 3 times during that meeting, and let's see what the outcome is. And then gradually build on that, so maybe the next time they go into a meeting, they might make eye contact, for a little bit longer. Then the next time they may ask a question, or maybe interject on something. And all the time they're recording, what the outcome was. And it just starts to build confidence. Various things. So, for example, if somebody, quite common with social anxiety, people have a fear of people might notice that they're blushing or going red.
Okay.
So we might set up an online presentation where we have lots of people that come in on that Zoom meeting, and the client may decide that they want to talk about a subject of their choice. Right. And so we get them to do a mini presentation about that subject, but then we get them to prepare a series of questions that we put out to the rest of the audience that are in on that presentation. And those questions might be, did I go red when I was talking? Did I stutter my words? What was my eye contact like? Did you notice that I was shaking? What did my voice sound like?
So those questions decided by the
client themselves, yeah. So it gives them an opportunity to ask their audience. Yes, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
I get it. So it's linked to their concerns.
And then the audience then.
And
that's right.
Relevant specifically to that person and their situation.
Yeah, so they set up the questions that they would like to ask their audience. they do their presentation,
Right.
and then the audience then will ask. It's all anonymous.
Yeah.
And then we gather that information and give that back to the client. So it's what they start to see is that the way they believe they're perceived is not actually what other people see, and it can be really quite powerful.
Okay.
That experiment, and it's a big ask of a client to do that, because that's a big fear for them. So it takes, sort of having a good trust with your therapist, and really trusting in that relationship for them to be able to actually put themselves forward to do that.
So it might take time to build up to that.
Absolutely, yeah. Also, what we ask clients to do is to gradually drop those safety behaviours. So, when we talked about not making eye contact, so maybe get themselves to sort of, just look up and have a look around for a couple of seconds. We might say, next time maybe you go into a public place or in a gathering, you don't use your mobile phone, and just, have a look around the room, because people with social anxiety feel that, everybody's looking at me. They'll think I'm weird. They'll notice that I'm anxious, or they'll think I'll look awkward. These are just some examples.
Yeah,
but actually, they don't get the chance to disprove that, because the fear of looking around the room feels so debilitating to try. So what we do is say, okay, so just for a couple of seconds, maybe the next time you go, you could just have a look around the room and just see how many people are looking. And actually what they learn is that people are just getting on with their own stuff. Nobody's really taking any notice. So they might try it again for a little bit longer. And as time goes on, they start to gain a little bit more confidence, and they start to disprove their predictions that everybody's looking at them.
That sounds like it could be quite a big task, especially if you've been dealing with social anxiety for a long time. Berni, in your experience, how many sessions does it take for someone's confidence to start to grow and their feelings of anxiety to start to reduce?
And that varies really, Jo. Obviously, as well as each therapy session, with CBT, there is a commitment to do homework outside of the session, so in between sessions. And obviously, if somebody's really committed to the homework and really engaged, they're going to recover a lot quicker. So for example, the homework might be, those behaviour experiments that we talked about, or challenging negative thoughts, or practicing making eye contact, relaxation techniques. This is the homework that we're talking about.
Okay.
So the more committed and engaged somebody is, obviously, the quicker we'll see them, recover and get better and grow in confidence. And we work as a team. It's in collaboration, myself and the client. It's teamwork together. And a good working relationship.
As we come to the end of today's podcast, I want to ask you a final question, and that's, what advice would you give to someone listening to this that thinks that sounds like me, or I can relate to that?
Okay, so, well, first of all, I'm in absolute admiration of everyone that makes contact with us. It's a big ask, and it takes real courage. I think what I would say is, drop us an email, or just make that initial call, and hopefully, after hearing this podcast today, people realise this is very common. It's something that we work with a lot. So it's just taking that initial step, and let's work together to help you feel better.
We want you to remember LionHeart Counselling is available for free to RICS professionals and their partner or spouse, with our in-house counsellors, Berni and Mark. Or if you've been listening to this today, you think, I recognise some of those signs in my teenager, remember, we're also able to offer counselling support to teenagers of our ICS professionals through our partnership with Open Door Counselling. So thank you all for listening to LionHeart Talks podcast. If you've been affected by what we've been talking about today, then please do take a look at the LionHeart website to see how we can support you further. I've been your host, Jo Grant, and I've been joined today by our lovely guest, Berni Antoniou.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.